Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really excited to have you here to join us for our live webinar on Abu Dhabi Global Market. This session is being recorded, and we will be able to share the full recording and presentation with you afterwards. We also encourage any questions. So if you have any throughout the session, please put them into the Q&A section, and the team will be able to kind of address any of them at the end. We also have a few live polls that will go live throughout the session. So please do interact because it really gives us a good benchmark and understanding of how we can support you better. I'm really pleased to introduce our two speakers today. Jonathan Kelly is our Business Development Manager based in Abu Dhabi, and he works really closely with companies setting up and expanding in the region. And then joining him is our Head of Administration, Jocelyn Viernes. We are very proud to say that we are a registered corporate service provider in ADGM, and we support clients through that entire process of establishment and throughout the whole business journey. And many of you have recently attended our DIFC webinar, and off of the back of that, requested one for ADGM. So here it is. So I'm going to pass over to our first speaker, who is Jonathan. Jonathan, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This presentation will be kind of focused on ADGM, a few of the key selling points, why companies and individuals choose to set up in ADGM, and really how Sovereign PPG can assist with that transition. If we start off with the most basic question, why ADGM? I always like to start a presentation with a fact or a figure or a stat. The numbers never lie, of course. So our inquiries for Abu Dhabi are up 36% compared to 2024. Okay, so that's a huge increase. And if we focus more on ADGM specifically, the inquiries are up 72% compared to last year. So you can imagine the buzz around ADGM, the hype, it's all very real here, and it's all very relative to what we will speak about here today. If we look at some other figures that I feel like are relevant, on the right side of the screen, I'm not sure if you can see it, Bianca. This is not there, but ADGM communities have grown to over 36,000 individuals. That's a huge amount of potential clients, potential partners that you could be working with, that you could engage with, and really pivotal for substance to move and migrate business to a different region or a different free zone within the UAE. If we look at the amount of financial firms and the kind of assets under management, 28.6 trillion US dollars. Again, a staggering figure here. We'll just hold just to make
sorry,
sure.
John. I'm just holding you for a second because some people are complaining that they can't hear sound. Can anybody confirm they are able to hear us?
Nope.
I've got a couple of people confirming that they can hear. Yeah, okay. I'll pop into the chat that those individuals just need to log back in. So carry on, John.
No problem. If we look at the statistics around the active licenses, as of mid-2025, over 11,000 licenses within ADGM. Again, a staggering figure, and it really shows the growth that ADGM is trying to create within the region. You'll hear buzzwords such as Falcon economy. You'll hear buzzwords such as the capital of capital. Again, this is an incentive, a push from the local Abu Dhabi government and ADGM to push their infrastructure, their very innovative legislation, to appeal and attract not just SMEs, but large global conglomerates to not only Abu Dhabi and the UAE, but ADGM specifically. I think if we focus more on, again, some kind of flowers around the ADGM infrastructure, they celebrated 10 years most recently. I'm not sure if anybody's seen the fireworks. Very impressive as all things ADGM are. Again, the investor-friendly atmosphere that ADGM promotes makes it a great place not only to start to do business, but to continue business that is already thriving. You will see leaders in finance within Abu Dhabi and specifically ADGM. We're talking about Big Four here. We're talking about Golden Circle. law firms. We're talking about some of the oil and gas sector is also based out of ADGM to a smaller degree, of course, versus mainland, but still very present within ADGM. If we think again, zooming out a little bit more, what has happened most recently, if we think of 2025, ADGM has expanded to Ream Island, which has created a huge buzz now for more companies to come in, have premises within the free zone as well. And also, it gives a lot more opportunity for office space within ADGM, whereas typically you would be somewhat limited to Almaria Island, and now Ream Island is included in all of that. So you can imagine, even for a real estate perspective, a business perspective, this expansion and the financial investment that is taken to do that is so substantial, and it really shows an intent from ADGM to continue the momentum that they have already within the region. If we think of regulation, again, they have a very transparent and efficient framework within ADGM based on English common law. Again, that really is a selling factor to a lot of US companies or UK companies because it will be a law infrastructure and ecosystem that perhaps they're more familiar with and can implement through their IP or products or services that they offer locally. Strong dispute resolution, of course, is very important here rather than Sharia or local law. A lot of clients that I speak to want to avoid that again because they're more focused and more familiar with the common law aspect. Huge plus here for ADGM. Only DIFC and ADGM have that locally in the UAE. So again, a major selling point there. If we focus on the tax environment, just at a high level overview, of course, 0% corporate tax, no personal income tax, no capital gains tax, no withholding tax on dividends, interest, or royalties. Again, making it a great place not only to do business as a company or a conglomerate, but also as an individual. So you can really see the entry points for residency, you can see the entry points for businesses, and ADGM really is the place to do business at the moment. Abu Dhabi Finance Week is next week as well. So if anybody's attending, I'll be around as well to catch up then. If we like to move on now, Bianca. Setting up in ADGM, yeah. So perhaps Jocelyn, if you'd like to take us through the different types of entities that are available in ADGM. Hey, Jocelyn, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Johnny. As Bianca said, I'm Jocelyn. I am the head of the administration team in Sovereign UAE, basically the offshore team. So entities in ADGM, I'm not going to read what you can see on the screen, but basically there are three main categories. So you've got the financial services that deal with any financial activities that obviously will require FSRA pre-approval before you can set up your company. And then you've got your non-financial services. This is mostly where my team kind of provides support. And then we've also got the retail, obviously, because ADGM has got the Galleria Mall, and then hopefully in Al Reem there's a lot of area to build on, so there'll be something there where you could provide all the retail activities. The main services that obviously our clients come in, because we're focusing here, this webinar is mostly for the SPVs, special purpose vehicle, and the foundations. So those are non-commercial activities, so mostly holding activities and investment, the holding of investments. Can we go on to the next slide? I believe the next slide should have something. All right. So if you go into the ADGM portal, these are the type of legal entities that you can actually incorporate. So you choose from these, and this is where Sovereign can help with setting up of any of these legal types. Of course, depending on the actual activity that your entity is going to set up, you might need additional approvals, or if it's a passive holding entity, then it goes straight through the normal registration process that my team can take care of. We're a team of 5 administrators within the SPV foundation circle. And then we've got another team that does all of the licensing, the operational companies. Can we go on to the next slide, please? All right. So the core structures of the non-financial entities are the managing office. So this is where clients would set up a company, and they would need another company that oversees let's say, the administration or the management, even payroll, to be honest, or HR services of that company. So there are specific activities within ADGM's list of permitted activities that can take care of these activities. Let me just skip on to the last one, which is the proprietary investment activities. So clients would want to invest actively into not just as the passive holding, right, but as in commercial activities, in active trading sectors. So you've got your commercial companies, you've got your healthcare, your retail sectors. There is a specific activity code that allows clients to carry out this activity. So obviously, proprietary investment would be investing the shareholders or the BO's own funds. Now, managing office and proprietary investment activities are considered operational activities, which means you would need to secure your own office to carry out your activities. And these activities will allow you to hire employees, secure visas, and actually operate from within ADGM, either in Al Marja or Al Reem. Now, the middle part is where we kind of operate as a team, because holding companies, passive holding of equity interest in other companies, this is mainly the purpose that clients come to us to set up their SPVs. Now, they obviously also consider layering that when it comes to having a foundation sitting at the top that basically covers the entire, let's say, it's family wealth preservation that they're looking at. So that sits nicely at the top with the SPV holding the assets, holding the property, and it could be 1 or 2 or 3 SPVs sitting under the foundation that will take care of each kind of sector of assets that the company the individuals have. Obviously, if it's we can go into the requirements later on. Sorry. Can we go on to the next slide? I think, Johnny, this is yours to take.
Sure, thanks, Jocelyn. So I guess, guys, just focusing more on one of the most common structures within ADGM. Jocelyn mentioned it already, but SPV, special purpose vehicle. So an SPV essentially is a non-operational holding entity. This entity can hold classic cars, it can hold property, it can hold different IP, it can hold, equity bonds, things like that. So this is a very useful way to layer an ownership structure and to add that extra layer of protection, within the UAE and within a defined ecosystem such as ADGM. If we think about the barriers to entry within an SPV, the fees, the government fees are very low, relatively speaking, and that allows not only UBOs and HNWIs, but also perhaps SME holders or small business owners themselves to actually create that layer of ownership until they get to the individual UBO themselves. A key thing here is, no attested required documentation is needed here with SPVs. This is key again, as you may know, for UBO declaration within Abu Dhabi mainland. If there's corporate layers, each layer must be attested, certified, and translated if applicable. to declare that UBO. For SPVs, it's slightly different. Again, it aligns a little bit more with the kind of more flexible ADGM framework and familiarity that common law jurisdiction brings to different entities. Again, it's not just used by investors or UBOs, family offices here are relevant, funds are relevant. It's mostly for IP and structuring protection. We see a lot of international founders using ADGM SPVs for that kind of layered protection that they might want to have between them and their assets. How sovereign can help, I guess, is key here. A lot of ADGM SPVs, 9 times out of 10, will have to appoint a registered corporate service provider to service their SPV, as well as use a domiciled address. And that's all things that sovereign PPG can assist with. A few things to note on SPVs and ADGM in general, actually, is that there must be a nexus requirement that must be satisfied here. And what nexus is essentially ADGM saying, okay, well, you're welcome to use our ecosystem, but you must have one targeted UAE asset. Now, this can be laid out in a business plan. This can be laid out as a title deed, or again, like I say, a fund one is, maybe a classic car, something like this. But it must be a UAE-based asset. So these are all things that you definitely will need to have advice on, and that's again where we come in to provide you that professional advice and guidance when setting up your SPV and when being your local corporate service provider for that function. Bianca, if you want to move on to the next slide. Yeah, so I mentioned it already regarding family offices. Again, this is more targeted towards succession planning, again, leaning on the flexible governance and the openness of ADGM. Succession planning, of course, is huge here within the UAE. So family offices and SPVs go hand in hand with that and create that layer of cleanness, essentially, at perhaps an event such as that. Again, these are very commonly used by high net worth individuals or ultra high net worth individual families, business groups alike, whether it be a large global conglomerate or an SME. Family offices are, again, a very easy way to enter a framework that ADGM has and operate under trusted common law jurisdiction as well. That adds its own legitimacy, not only to what a family office or an SPV might hold, but also kind of the UBOs as well. If we talk about some of the requirements, some of the barriers, for a family office specifically, it does require a clear business plan. So you must demonstrate, again, that nexus requirement that I mentioned. That must be fully satisfied. There is no other way around that. But again, that's all things that we can guide you on. And again, with a family office specifically, families must meet that high net worth or ultra high net worth thresholds. Again, we have internal guidelines on that, and definitely something we can assist with and guide you on further. Next slide then, Bianca, please. Jocelyn, if you'd like to take us through the restricted scope companies.
Sure. So in ADGM, you can choose to register your SPV as a restricted scope company. Now, restricted scope simply means the public has a limited view of information on the company. A standard company would show to the public the details of the entity, as in the registration number when it was registered, the CSP if applicable, and then it will show the business activities, the address, and the names of the directors and the names of the shareholders. But that's it. With a restricted scope company, they only see the entity details, the business activity, and the registered address. So it's kind of a privilege that clients would have to pay for, because there is an additional fee to be registered as an RSC. But you cannot register as an RSC just because you want the restriction on the public register. There are qualifying questions that has to be met before you are allowed to actually register as an RSC. The RSC is basically an SPV in any case. So you register as a standard special purpose vehicle. Your business activity would need to match the legal entity type. And then obviously the activity has to match as well, which is a passive holding company. Now, what is the privilege apart from the limited public information? One of them is that you are not required to file your annual accounts, and your accounts do not need to be audited. But for good governance, we recommend that company should still prepare its own internal management accounts or annual accounts, financial statements anyway, because you're still also required to register for corporate tax because you are a UAE registered entity. So that doesn't exclude you from your corporate tax obligations. And part of your corporate tax obligations, to get to that filing part, you would need to have your annual financials anyway. Now, we have quite a few RSCs. It's the requirement to the procedure to actually register that is no different than any other standard SPV. You are not exempted from completing your KYC, your compliance requirements, your anti-money laundering requirements. That still needs to be followed. Yes, the beneficial ownership information is not shown to the public, but it has to be declared to the registration authority. All right, next slide, please. Okay, foundations. This has been getting more and more traction. There's a lot of inquiries from individuals within the UAE, from families within the UAE, and also externally, because it is treated as a separate legal entity. So your assets are separate from the assets of the foundation. So it's independent of the individuals. Now, the ideal setup, the ideal setup would be for families to protect themselves. So because in the UAE, trusts are not a thing. It's more, yes, it is common law. ADGM is English common law, but due to Sharia, trusts are not an option. So foundation is very similar. It works similarly to a trust. Now, instead of a settlor, you've got a founder. So the founder is basically the one who decides what assets go into the foundation. Now, the founder doesn't control the trust. It would be the council members. To make sure there's independence and there's complete transparency, you need to have two separate council members appointed at all times. Now, yes, the founder can also be a council member, but there needs to be someone else independent alongside him. There's a minimum of two. You can also appoint corporate council members if you decide to do that. Now, a guardian, in terms of trust, they're the protector. That's an optional appointment. It's completely up to the founder and their families and their setup, whether they want to appoint a guardian or not. But basically, the council members and the guardian look after the assets of the trust on behalf of the founder and their intended beneficiaries to make sure that the object of the foundation, which is to provide continuous wealth transfer from one generation to the other, is met, and that the funds of the foundation are used for the purposes that has been laid out by the founder in the charter and the bylaws of the foundation. Now, yes, you need to have a company service provider if you are not an exempt foundation, and that CSP would also provide the registered address. So Sovereign usually do that. So it's part of the core service that we provide. Now, the fees for the foundation, I'm pretty sure everyone would be aware. It's published on the ADGM website, but as the CSP who will take care of all of this for you, of course, we have our service fees. Now, that we can provide to you offline. If anyone is interested, just drop a message on the chat. We'll make sure to reach out to you after the webinar and contact you separately. And of course, because it's an ADGM entity, you need to have an authorized signatory for licensing purposes. They need to be either UAE national, GCC nationals, or UAE residents. And of course, the nexus still applies. So you're setting up a foundation to hold your property and your assets in, let's say, in England. That doesn't work because there's no commercial benefit to the UAE. If you did that, you could set up your foundation or your trust anywhere else. But the ADGM would not approve that without that nexus in the UAE. So let's say you're setting up the foundation to hold that English asset, but then you're also setting it up so that you can own, let's say, shares in a DMCC or in another Abu Dhabi free zone entity. That is perfectly acceptable to the registration authority. All right, next slide, please. Jonathan, do you want to start, or should I start with the individuals? I'll start with individuals. You take the corporate.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So it's not just the individual shareholders that need to actually provide this. It's part of both sovereigns' KYC, onboarding, and compliance requirements, ongoing compliance. So any client who wants to set up in ADGM, we look at the structure first. So you want to set up the SPV or the foundation, and this is how you want to set it up. These are the directors or the founders, the council members, the shareholders, the BOs. We look through all of that, and then we'll let you know, okay, for this appointment, all of these, this is what we're going to need for the individual. So your individual directors, your individual shareholders, your beneficial owners specifically, and your authorized signatory. In some cases, there might be one and the same individuals, but anyone who is a part of the structure needs to provide these requirements. So passport copy, certified true copy. If you have a secondary nationality, which a lot of people these days, they do have that needs to be declared as well, because if we don't find that, ADGM will. A copy of your current UAE residency or Emirates ID, if applicable, especially if you are the authorized signatory named on the license, that is mandatory to have that. Your proof of your residential address. So obviously directors are not required to be residents, shareholders are not required to be residents. So where your usual residence address is, we need a document proving that. So it could be your utility bill. If you live in the UK, it could be your council tax bill. If you live in the US, could be your bank statement that shows the actual physical address, not a PO box. It needs to be the actual address because your residential address will be registered with ADGM. So it will be shown on the internal registers, obviously not in the public register. And then if you are a director and a shareholder, we would ideally require your CV, or if you have your profile completed in LinkedIn, send us the link. We'll grab the PDF there. Basically, what we're looking at especially for directors, is your qualification, like what is your work history, and whether, because ADGM would also look at your qualification as a director of this company or as a council member of the foundation. Johnny?
Sure. So if we think about what it means for corporate shareholders, a little less straightforward than individual shareholders. So look, essentially every layer up until the UBO will need to be documented here. So documented by that, I mean articles of association, memorandums of association, perhaps a cap table, a certificate of incumbency, registry of members, all of these legal documentations that would have been issued at the company issuance must be, we can assume, must be certified, attested, and if so, legally translated in the country of issuance. So certified and attested, that essentially means certified and attested by a lawyer, also in the home issuing jurisdiction, okay, whether that be UK, Australia, the US, and then also by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOFA, the UAE embassy in that jurisdiction as well. So each of these corporate layers must be actually documented and in many cases documented quite heavily. Whether it's a trust that's involved as well, what ADGM essentially want to see is, okay, here is company A, whether it be an operating holding company, operating company, a retail establishment, a foundation or otherwise, they really want to know, okay, well, who is the UBO, who is the beneficiary, and who controls essentially the entity. So from a corporate perspective, all of the documents are required up into the layer of the UBO, and then also the individual shareholders' documents that Jocelyn has mentioned will also then be required also. So that's kind of consistent throughout the UAE now. It's definitely a lot heavier, I would say, in Abu Dhabi mainland, specifically a lot of the common law jurisdictions like ADGM and DIFC will implement this because of their more tight AML and KYC requirements. But again, that's to safeguard who is actually interacting with the free zone, who your potential clients will be in the free zone, and essentially maintaining the reputation of ADGM as a free zone authority. If we want to move on to the next slide, Bianca. Yeah, I think we'll cover some case studies here. Jocelyn, if you want to take us through this ADGM Foundation case study.
This case study is quite straightforward. So the female client decided that they wanted to hold funds separately from their family's wealth. To segregate that, they came to us saying, this is what we want to do. How do we protect it? And because it is for the family's benefit and not your direct shareholder or they don't have individual shareholders in mind to hold the interest. The foundation is the next best choice, basically, because it covers a wide range of beneficiary class that can be built into the charter and the bylaws of the company. So Sovereign's role here is obviously to organize the registration of the foundation, make sure all the documentation is in order and all the KYC in place to submit that incorporation, that establishment application. And of course, we provide the domiciliary services, meaning we are the CSP, and we provide a registered office address for that foundation to make sure that the licensing requirements are complied with. We also conduct our periodic compliance review of the entity, not just because it's required by ADGM, but because our internal policies demand that we do that to make sure that all of our entities under administration are up to date on all things compliance and KYC, AML as well, anti-money laundering requirements. And of course, we take care of the renewal of the license, because even though it's a foundation, ADGM will issue a commercial license for that entity. And anything else that happens, all the ADGM would call it event-driven filings, right? So let's say the foundation decides that they want to add another council member, let's say. There's a filing that needs to be done. If the foundation wants to update the charter or amend the charter, that needs to be filed as well. Sovereign takes care of that. Now, anything else, obviously, that in case of this particular foundation, the beneficiaries are actually 4 BVI registered trusts. So it was a little bit document heavy, but because the trusts are obviously well established, the documentation is in order, and we were able to identify the actual beneficiaries of those trusts. The case was reviewed and accepted by ADGM, and the license of the foundation was issued with no issues, no returns, no questions, because we were clear from the beginning with the client. They provided us all of the documents that we know ADGM will ask for, and yeah, that was an interesting case, quite heavy on the documentation, but it was accepted by ADGM. Next one. This is
Sure. So
take it away.
if we look at this one, a corporate client within a DGM operating entity, the key things that you need to find out from your client are pretty much the same throughout the UAE, not just specific to ADGM. One, you need to find out what type of company it'll be. Okay, is it a local branch, a foreign branch, an LLC? And two, then who will own the entity? Okay, is it corporate ownership, individual ownership? And then the third horseman, so to speak, is the activity. So that will really give you a good picture of what your client or yourself will do, and kind of navigate through the requirements then, and what is needed for the company setup. For this example, we look at what type of company. Okay, it's 100% foreign owned LLC. That's relatively straightforward, the most popular in my opinion. The activity will be human resource consultancy, perfect, non-regulated, again, avoiding that regulation, which a lot of clients we advise to do, especially at the start. And because it's non-regulated and operational, then we have instances of labor and immigration here to consider. So a lot like an SPV, actually, where an authorized signatory of an operational company must have residency. So going back to an SPV, if they don't have residency, an operating holdco could be an option to get that residency again, and to then be able to operate, and bank accounts then become easier. For this example, I believe the Labour and Immigration file was opened by a member who was self-sponsored, had a golden visa, and then opened the Labour and Immigration file for the entity, and then they were able then to hire more staff under the license and under that Labour and Immigration file. Key things that this client was considering was the option to have a dual license within ADGM. ADGM is one of the very, very few free zones that actually has the instruments in place to actually roll out a dual license. Some free zones might say they can do it, and perhaps it's not actually operational yet. They're still developing that. ADGM can do it, something that we've done many times as well. So this was a relatively straightforward case, I would say. Very clean, and yeah, it got successfully opened. They had a business plan all ready to go. I believe this was an Australian company. So this is a perfect example of how Sovereign can help guide you in what you need to set up, not only within the ADGM, but within the UAE, to kind of put some color to the picture, what activities, what kind of ownership structure is best for you, what makes most sense. And again, that's why it's always important to, no matter what, get professional advice for you and your clients before making that transition to a new market or to ADGM more specifically. If you'd like to move on.
Great, guys. Thanks, John, for that. And well, John and Jocelyn. We've gotten to the questions part of the session. I've got a couple already. I'm having to navigate through everyone's AI note-taking bots that have entered the chat, but there's a couple that are here, so I'm just going to go through them. Ahmed was asking, is ADGM a designated free zone for tax purposes? Like, we've already kind of established that we won't go too far into tax, but you did mention the 0% tax there as a kind of blanket statement, John. Maybe you can.
Sure, yeah. So ADGM does have a 50-year tax relief. Likewise, DIFC has that. It's really the only two free zones that has that tax relief. It is a qualifying free zone. It is perfect for those holding entities, whether it be operational holding entity or SPVs. Again, another kind of USP, a unique selling point as to why ADGM is so popular. So from a tax perspective, ADGM is qualifying and it is very efficient. And again, why so many firms and new companies are coming here.
Great, thank you. Dr. Armin is asking if it's for the protection of family wealth, which is better, an SPV or foundation?
I think for family wealth, maybe you can add a bit to this, Jocelyn. For family wealth, I think a foundation is probably best. You can identify the beneficiaries more clearly and more legally binding. For SPVs, although it is non-operational, it's definitely for assets that you have right now, I would say. And SPVs, I think it's definitely for a different function. Would you agree with that, Jocelyn?
I agree with that. As I mentioned earlier, if you know specifically, because SPVs would be for holding your equities, and your equities, it's not a long-term asset, isn't it? Right? Because once that once the company that holds the equity decides to sell, then that's it. You haven't got any assets left. Whereas a foundation is more of it's the longevity, and also because you want generational family wealth to be covered by that structure, to make sure that your children, your children's children, and so on actually benefit from all the hard work that you're putting into this foundation, because you're settling your properties and your assets, like you said, your classic cars and your artwork and your bank account and your investment account and your stocks, let's say, right? That will remain in there for as long as the foundation is alive. And of course, it will generate that pool of funds for your intended beneficiaries. So your charters and your bylaws dictate what happens to these funds and which of the beneficiaries benefit. So for family wealth preservation, then definitely a foundation.
I think just one more little side note on that. We hadn't mentioned it before, but you can actually have a bank account with an SPV, even though it is non-operational. It's definitely not the most straightforward process, but it is something we can advise on. So please do reach out, perhaps if you're in that situation.
Fabulous. Ali is asking about information on base costs for some of these core structures. I think ADGM in terms of government fees are quite transparent about that, aren't they?
For sure.
Information is quite public.
They definitely had 50% off at the start of the new year because of the REAM expansion incentive, which was reducing the government fees for operational companies quite significantly, as I'm sure you can imagine. So a lot of that is online. Our fees, again, will be very bespoke to you and to the type of organization you want to create. So definitely do reach out after this call and we can definitely get you a quote.
And I've got another question from Floribel about, are the documents for corporate shareholders, do they need to be legalized for use in the UAE?
I'll take that one. Floribel, for ADGM registration, it's not necessarily required to be legalized. As long as the jurisdiction, the regulator where the companies, the corporate shareholders are registered, they have to be issued within the last 3 months of the application to ADGM. And they can be certified by the registrar or certified by a notary or a banker or a chartered accountant, basically a qualified professional, someone who is a member of a professional board that has a license with that board can certify that, but definitely not legalized. Now, where you might need this legalized, I think Johnny had mentioned this, is let's say your SPV is going to hold shares in an Abu Dhabi mainland LLC. Because of the requirements in the mainland, then you would need all those other layers legalized. But for ADGM purposes itself, you don't need legalization.
Okay, thanks, Joss. David asked, how is it easy to change from an SPV to a foundation for family office preservation? So I guess changing structures.
Unfortunately, with ADGM, they don't allow that switching. If you're a foundation and you want to then convert you can convert your SPV into an operational company and vice versa, but not from one legal entity type to another, to SPV to foundation, because those are distinctly separate. Whereas I know in the IFC they do allow this, but ADGM, maybe they're considering it, but at the moment, no, you cannot switch from an SPV to a foundation and vice versa.
Mariam was also asking about what the office space requirements are to register an ADGM license.
Sure. So, typically in ADGM, it's one desk, one visa. You will obviously need to have an authorized signatory with a visa. If you don't have someone already in country, there are options for you for an interim, but again, this is very circumstantial. We look at it on a case by case. So to answer your question at the start, it's one desk, one visa, but again, this affects labor quota and things like that. So you really need to think, okay, what does the next 12 months look like for my entity? How many staff will I need? We do have a lot of great providers that offer flexi working, co-working spaces, whether it be Regis or ServCorp. There's a lot of them out there, so there is a lot of options for you. But again, it's very specific to your actual situation.
Great. I see there's one other attendee, Bonnie, who's got her hand up, but unfortunately I can't turn your microphone on. So unless you pop it in the chat, I think that's all the questions that we've actually.
Oh, you're on mute, Bianca.
Oh, sorry, cut myself off short. Bonnie, maybe I'll get John to reach out to you separately and discuss maybe any additional questions you have. I've seen a couple of people have asked for some proposals or some quotes regarding foundations, so I'll get the team to follow up with you for those. But that's all we have. Oh, wait, sorry, one more question. Oh, Bonnie there. How easy is it to set up an RSC, and what is the time taken to open a bank account for this?
As I said, the RSC is pretty much an SPV, but with that added restriction option. The question there is, do you satisfy the criteria to register a restricted scope company? So maybe, yeah, Bonnie, reach out to Jonathan and myself, and we'll talk you through it and see whether the setup the structure that you want to set up qualifies for an RSC. Now, for the bank account, it's a very sticky subject when it comes to these types of entities, because while they are set up, correctly, and they're active and they've got UBO registrations and everything filed with the authority, the banks operate on the basis of their central bank of the UAE guidelines, and obviously their internal risk appetite and their business limitations. So we can't really say how long a bank account takes. All that Sovereign PPG can do once we help you set up your entities is to help you provide the bank with the documents that they will need from your entities, because the banks need to talk to the owners of the companies. So they would want input from the beneficial owners or the shareholders or the directors as to, why do you want to open an account with us? What's your business model? What's your business plan? What's your turnover? All of those questions, obviously, you would need to talk to the bank with. They might be able to open it for you quicker than most, but we can't really say for sure. All we can do is help you with the documents that the banks will ask for.
And then one last question's just come through as well from Ekaterina, saying that some of the structures and requirements are similar to what you can find in the EU, particularly Dutch ones. What are some of the core differences maybe that ADGM provides?
Not familiar with
Yeah, I think
setup,
ADGM, one of the most outstanding differences is the common law jurisdiction versus mainland or some of the other free zones. So I think that does create a point of differentiation. Again, ADGM is definitely an incubator for new business, whether it be through Hub 71, the ADGM Academy, A lot of the business councils are very active in ADGM as well. So all of these kind of set ADGM apart from different jurisdictions within the UAE, and as much as they want to be collaborative, and they are trying to be the best as well. But some of those points of differentiation, I think, may be similar to the Dutch ecosystem, but yeah, maybe they're learning from the Dutch. I don't know.
I wanted to add as well with ADGM. I'm sure probably in the EU as well. You don't actually need to be present and in front of the regulator to actually incorporate. That's the reason. That's why you got us. We're the CSP. We do this for you. So we're your interface. So they accept digital signatures. They're one of the first ones to actually fully integrate an electronically signed documentation. Even their own documents are actually issued electronically. In the beginning, they were issuing paper certificates and commercial licenses, but not anymore. And your other government authorities within the UAE, your DED, your banks as well, MOFA, will accept the documents issued by ADGM because they come with a verification code. And most other regulators now are starting to do that as well. RAC ICC definitely has started doing that. JAFSA even for their certificate of incumbency and good standing. So they're moving with the times basically. But ADGM is kind of one of the first to start that.
And then there was a question from Dr. Amin about foundations. Are people able to use international banks like Citibank or UBS, for example?
We haven't seen an example, but owing to the common law aspect of ADGM entities, there's no reason why you can't go to an international bank. And like I said, whatever the bank needs, and typically the banks would require the sort of same set of documents anyway, and that is readily available, and we can help you. If it doesn't exist, let's say they're looking for a power of attorney for the signatory or a resolution, that's what we're here for, is to help you get that list of requirements completed for your bank account requirements.
Okay, great. I think we can leave it there. Jocelyn, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. Everybody that joined on to the session today, we hope that you found that insightful. If you've got any other questions, feel free to reach out to either of the guys on the chat. Their email addresses are right there on the screen, so feel free to jot those down. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Salam alaikum.
Thank you, everyone.